David Johnson pushed his cleaning cart through the empty hallways of TechFlow Industries every evening at exactly 6:30. The building felt different after hours. During the day, it buzzed with energy as hundreds of employees rushed between meetings, typed frantically at computers, and discussed million-dollar deals over coffee. But when David arrived, silence took over. The only sounds were his footsteps on polished floors and the gentle hum of machines that never slept. He had been cleaning these offices for 3 years now. 3 years of emptying trash cans, mopping floors, and wiping down conference room tables covered in coffee rings and scattered papers. Most employees had left by the time he started his shift, but occasionally he would encounter a few stragglers working late. They would offer polite nods or quick hellos before returning to their screens, treating him with the kind of distant courtesy people show to those whose work keeps their world running smoothly in the background. David didn't mind being invisible. In many ways, he preferred it. Being unseen meant he could observe without judgment, listen without being expected to contribute, and learn without anyone questioning why a janitor would be interested in corporate strategy. And over these 3 years, he had learned quite a lot about TechFlow Industries. The company specialized in automated sorting technology for warehouses and distribution centers. Their machines could scan, categorize, and route millions of packages every day with incredible speed and accuracy. At least that's how it was supposed to work. David had been hearing about problems with their newest system for over a year now. Every evening he would clean the main conference room where the engineering team held their daily crisis meetings. The whiteboard was always covered with diagrams, error codes, and percentage calculations. Even after wiping it clean, David could still make out the ghost marks from previous meetings. The numbers told a troubling story. The new automated sorting system, which had cost the company $15 million to develop, was rejecting 30% of all products that passed through it. This wasn't supposed to happen. The machine was designed to sort items with 99% accuracy, but instead it was failing at an alarming rate. David had overheard enough conversations to understand that this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was costing the company serious money. Every rejected product had to be manually inspected, reprocessed, and often shipped separately. Customer complaints were piling up. Delivery schedules were falling behind. Some clients were threatening to cancel their contracts and find more reliable partners. The engineering team had been working around the clock for 18 months trying to fix the problem, burning through their budget and their patience. David found their discussions fascinating, even though he only caught fragments while emptying trash bins or replacing whiteboard markers. The engineers spoke in technical language that would sound like gibberish to most people, but David had always been good with patterns and problem solving. Growing up in a family where money was tight, he had learned to fix things rather than replace them. Broken appliances, leaky pipes, faulty electrical connections. He had taught himself to diagnose and repair almost anything through careful observation and logical thinking. As he listened to the engineers debate various theories about sensor, calibration, and software algorithms, David began forming his own mental picture of what might be going wrong. He wasn't an engineer, but he understood that machines were just tools designed to perform specific tasks. When tools didn't work properly, there was always a reason. Sometimes the reason was complex, requiring deep technical knowledge to uncover. But sometimes it was surprisingly simple, hidden in plain sight where experts might overlook it because they were focused on more sophisticated explanations. The rejection rate had been climbing steadily over the past 6 months. David knew this because he had been inadvertently tracking the mood in the building. When the numbers were bad, conversations became more tense. Engineers stayed later, working through dinner. Executives held more emergency meetings. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing week. David's route took him through every department in the building. He cleaned the executive offices on the top floor, where conversations focused on budgets, timelines, and increasingly urgent board meetings. He mopped the floors in the research and development lab, where prototypes sat partially assembled and test results covered every available surface. He emptied trash cans in the customer service department, where representatives spent their days apologizing to frustrated clients and processing return requests. But the factory floor was where the real action happened. This was where the troubled sorting machine operated 24 hours a day. processing thousands of packages in an endless cycle of scanning, sorting, and routing. David's cleaning duties included sweeping around the massive equipment and wiping down control panels that displayed streams of data he couldn't fully understand but found oddly mesmerizing. The machine itself was an impressive piece of technology. Standing nearly 20 feet tall and stretching across half the warehouse floor, it looked like something from a science fiction movie. Conveyor belts carried packages through various scanning stations, where lasers and cameras analyzed size, weight, shape, and destination codes. Robotic arms moved with mechanical precision, plucking items from the main belt and routing them to the appropriate shipping areas. When it worked correctly, the machine was beautiful to watch. Packages flowed through the system like water through carefully designed channels, each one finding its proper destination with seemingly effortless accuracy. But when it malfunctioned, which happened more and more frequently, the entire process ground to a halt. Red warning lights would flash, alarms would sound, and human workers would have to step in to manually sort the backlogged packages. David had witnessed several of these breakdowns during his evening shifts. Each time, a team of technicians would rush to diagnose the problem, running tests and adjusting settings while frustrated supervisors looked on. The technicians were skilled professionals who understood the machine's complex programming and intricate mechanical systems, but even they seemed baffled by the inconsistent performance. What struck David as particularly odd was that the machine seemed to have good days and bad days, almost like it had moods. Some evenings he would arrive to find it running smoothly, processing packages with the efficiency it was designed for. Other nights it would be struggling with repeated failures, rejecting perfectly normal packages for reasons no one could explain. This inconsistency puzzled David more than the technical failures themselves. In his experience, fixing things around his neighborhood intermittent problems were often the hardest to solve but usually had the simplest explanations. A wire that only disconnected when vibrations reached a certain frequency, a switch that worked fine until temperature changes caused metals to expand or contract, a sensor that functioned perfectly until something in the environment interfered with its operation. He began paying closer attention to the patterns, making mental notes about when the machine performed well versus when it struggled. He wasn't conducting formal research, just satisfying his natural curiosity while going about his regular cleaning duties. But over time, he started noticing correlations that the engineers might have missed because they were focused on the machine itself, rather than everything around it. The building's environment changed throughout the day in ways that most people never considered. Lighting shifted as the sun moved across the sky, and different sets of overhead fixtures turned on and off. Temperature fluctuated as heating and cooling systems responded to occupancy levels and outside weather. Even the electrical load varied, as different equipment powered up and down according to programmed schedules. David found himself wondering if any of these environmental factors might be affecting the sorting machine's performance. It was just a theory and probably wrong, but it gave him something to think about during the quiet hours of his shift. Little did he know that this casual curiosity would soon lead to one of the most remarkable discoveries in the company's history. The first sign that something had gone terribly wrong came on a Thursday evening in March. David noticed it as soon as he walked into the building for his shift. The usual quiet atmosphere was replaced by frantic activity. Lights blazed in offices that were normally dark by this time. Voices echoed through hallways that should have been empty. People were running between departments, clutching phones and tablets, their faces tight with stress. David had seen the company face challenges before, but this felt different. This felt like panic. He began his rounds on the third floor where the customer service department was buzzing with activity despite the late hour. Every desk was occupied, phones ringing constantly. Representatives spoke in apologetic tones, their conversations following the same pattern over and over. Apologies, explanations about sorting errors, promises to fix the problems as quickly as possible. Many calls ended with the unmistakable sound of angry customers hanging up. As David emptied trash cans and wiped down surfaces, he picked up fragments of conversations that painted a disturbing picture. The automated sorting machine hadn't just malfunctioned that day. It had experienced what one supervisor called a complete behavioral reversal. Instead of rejecting defective or incorrectly labeled packages, it had started accepting them while rejecting perfectly good items. An entire day's worth of shipments had been sorted incorrectly. The implications were staggering. Thousands of packages had been sent to wrong destinations. Products meant for priority delivery had been routed to slow shipping lanes. Time-sensitive medical supplies had been delayed, while non-urgent items were expedited. The sorting errors had created a massive logistics nightmare that would take weeks to untangle. David moved to the second floor, where the engineering department looked like a war room. Whiteboards covered every wall, filled with new diagrams and calculations. Computer screens displayed streams of error logs and diagnostic data. Engineers who usually went home hours earlier were still hunched over their workstations, running test after test, trying to understand how their carefully programmed machine could have gotten everything so backwards. The head of engineering, Dr. Patricia Williams, stood at the center of the chaos, coordinating multiple troubleshooting efforts simultaneously. She had been with the company for 12 years and had personally overseen the development of the sorting technology from its earliest stages. David had occasionally heard her giving presentations to potential clients, speaking with confidence about the system's reliability and accuracy. Tonight, that confidence was nowhere to be seen. Dr. Williams was on her fourth cup of coffee, gesturing at diagnostic reports while explaining to her team that none of the data made sense. The machine's sensors were functioning normally. The software was running without errors. The mechanical components were operating within proper parameters, yet somehow the entire system had inverted its decision-making process without any obvious explanation. David continued his cleaning routine, moving through departments while the crisis unfolded around him. In the finance office, accountants were calculating the cost of the day's disaster. Shipping mistakes would result in hundreds of thousands of dollars in expedited redelivery fees. Customer compensation would add even more to the bill. Lost contracts could reach into the millions if clients decided to find more reliable partners. But the most serious conversation was happening on the top floor, in the executive conference room. David could hear voices through the closed door as he cleaned the adjacent offices. The CEO, Rebecca Martinez, was on a conference call with the board of directors, explaining how their flagship product had essentially malfunctioned in the worst possible way on the worst possible day. The timing couldn't have been more devastating. That morning, TechFlow had been in final negotiations with Data Corp, a massive logistics company that was considering a $50 million contract to install sorting systems in 37 distribution centers across the country. The deal would have been the largest in TechFlow's history, enough to secure the company's future for years to come. Data Corp executives had been touring the facility that afternoon, watching demonstrations of the sorting technology in action. They had been impressed with the speed and precision of the machines, asking detailed questions about reliability rates and maintenance requirements. Everything had been going perfectly until the system failure occurred during the live demonstration. David learned these details as he gradually pieced together conversations from different departments. The Data Corp representatives had witnessed the sorting machine reject an entire batch of correctly labeled packages while accepting items that were clearly mislabeled. They had watched as alarms began sounding and technicians rushed to intervene. The demonstration that was supposed to showcase TechFlow's cutting-edge technology had instead highlighted its most embarrassing failure. The potential customers had left immediately, canceling their planned dinner meeting and declining to schedule follow-up discussions. Their message was clear. They couldn't risk their business on technology that could fail so spectacularly without warning. As David worked his way back down to the first floor, he found Rebecca Martinez still in the conference room at 9:30, long after the board meeting had ended. She sat alone at the large table, surrounded by reports and laptop computers, her head in her hands. The weight of the crisis seemed to have settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. David had seen Martinez around the building many times over the past 3 years. She was the kind of leader who knew employees' names, who stopped to ask about family members, who celebrated team achievements and took responsibility for failures. She had built TechFlow from a small startup into a respected industry player through careful planning and smart decisions. Now, all of that progress was threatened by a machine that had seemingly developed a mind of its own. The phone rang, interrupting the silence. Martinez answered with a tired voice that barely resembled her usual confident tone. The conversation was brief, but devastating. Another major client was calling to express concerns about their existing sorting systems. Word was already spreading throughout the industry about TechFlow's demonstration disaster. After hanging up, Martinez stared at the financial projections spread across the table. The numbers told a grim story. The lost DataCorp contract was just the beginning. If other clients canceled their orders or demanded refunds, TechFlow could face bankruptcy within months. 400 employees would lose their jobs. Years of research and development would be wasted. David finished cleaning the conference room quietly, trying not to disturb the CEO's troubled thoughts. As he prepared to leave, he heard her make another phone call. This time, she was speaking with the head of engineering, her voice carrying a note of desperation that David had never heard from any executive before. The conversation revealed the true scope of the crisis. The engineering team had been working for 18 months to solve the machine's reliability problems, spending over $2 million on software updates, hardware modifications, and consulting fees. They had made progress, reducing the rejection rate from 30% to around 25%, but they had never solved the fundamental issue. Now, with the behavioral reversal, they were facing an entirely new type of failure. The machine wasn't just unreliable anymore. It was actively making wrong decisions in ways that seemed almost intentional. Dr. Williams admitted that her team was completely baffled. Nothing in their training or experience had prepared them for this type of malfunction. Martinez ended the call with an ultimatum that sent chills through David's spine. If the engineering team couldn't identify and fix the problem by Monday morning, she would have to recommend to the board that they shut down the sorting division entirely. The company would refocus on their older, less sophisticated products, while trying to minimize layoffs and pay off their debts. David realized he was witnessing the potential end of TechFlow Industries as he knew it. The company that had provided his steady employment for 3 years, the place where he had found purpose and dignity in his work, was teetering on the edge of collapse. The building that had become his second home might soon be empty, with, for sale signs in the windows and scattered remnants of failed dreams. As he finished his shift and prepared to leave, David walked past the factory floor one last time. The sorting machine stood silent in the darkness, its conveyor belts motionless, its scanning stations powered down for the night. During the day, it had caused millions of dollars in damage and threatened the livelihoods of hundreds of people. Now it looked almost innocent, like a sleeping giant that didn't understand the chaos it had created. Standing there in the quiet factory, David felt an unexpected surge of determination. This machine had become more than just another piece of equipment to clean around. It had become a puzzle that needed solving, a challenge that called to the problem-solving instincts he had developed over years of fixing broken things with limited resources. He didn't know if a janitor could succeed where trained engineers had failed. He didn't know if his observations and theories would lead anywhere useful. But he knew that he couldn't just watch TechFlow die without at least trying to help. The company had given him more than just a job. It had given him a sense of belonging and purpose that he wasn't ready to lose. David made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would pay closer attention to the sorting machine than ever before. He would use his unique position as the invisible observer to look for clues that others might have missed. And if he found something, anything that might help, he would find the courage to speak up. The building fell silent as David locked up and headed home, but his mind was already racing with possibilities. Little did anyone know that the solution to their $100 million problem was about to come from the most unexpected source imaginable. Friday evening arrived with the weight of impending doom hanging over TechFlow Industries. David entered the building knowing that this might be one of his last shifts if the company couldn't solve their crisis by Monday. The halls felt different tonight, heavy with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Most employees had gone home early, unable to concentrate on regular work while their jobs hung in the balance. David decided to alter his usual routine. Instead of starting with the upper floors, he went directly to the factory floor. If he was going to find something that could help, it would be here. close to the machine that had caused all the trouble. The sorting system stood idle in the dim evening light, its massive frame casting long shadows across the warehouse floor. He had walked past this machine thousands of times over the past 3 years, but tonight he approached it with different eyes. Tonight he wasn't just a janitor cleaning around expensive equipment. He was a problem solver, looking for clues that trained engineers might have overlooked. David began his investigation the way he approached any repair job, by understanding the environment. He had learned long ago that machines don't exist in isolation. They interact with everything around them: temperature, humidity, vibrations, electrical currents, and dozens of other factors that most people never consider. The factory floor operated on a different schedule than the office areas. While the executives and engineers worked regular daytime hours, the sorting machine ran continuously, processing packages around the clock. Different crews managed the day, evening, and night shifts, each bringing their own procedures and habits to the operation. David had observed these shift changes many times. The day crew worked under bright natural light, streaming through large windows along the factory's east wall. They moved with the confident efficiency of people who could see everything clearly, handling packages with quick, precise movements. The evening crew worked under the overhead fluorescent lighting system, which provided adequate illumination but felt somehow different from natural sunlight. The night crew relied entirely on artificial lighting, creating an environment that felt almost underwater compared to daytime conditions. As David began cleaning around the sorting machine, he noticed something he had never paid attention to before. The overhead fluorescent lights weren't perfectly steady. Like all fluorescent bulbs, they flickered at a frequency too fast for human eyes to detect, but visible to sensitive electronic equipment. He knew this because his brother Tony worked as an electrician and had mentioned it during a family dinner months ago. Tony had been complaining about a job where security cameras kept malfunctioning in a warehouse. The cameras would work perfectly during the day, but produce distorted images under fluorescent lighting. The problem turned out to be frequency interference. The flickering of the fluorescent bulbs was disrupting the camera's image sensors at specific wavelengths. David stopped sweeping and looked up at the lights above the sorting machine. They were positioned directly over the main scanning station, about 20 feet above the conveyor belt where packages passed through optical sensors. The scanning system used laser beams and high-resolution cameras to read labels, measure dimensions, and identify sorting destinations. These were exactly the type of sensitive optical devices that Tony had said could be affected by fluorescent frequency interference. The realization hit David like a lightning bolt. The sorting machine's optical sensors were positioned at the same height as the overhead fluorescent lights. During day shifts, when natural sunlight dominated the factory floor, the fluorescent lights were usually turned off or set to lower intensity. But during evening and night shifts, these lights operated at full power, creating a constant flicker that could potentially interfere with the machine's vision system. David pulled out his phone and used its flashlight to examine the sorting machine more closely. The main optical sensor array was mounted on an adjustable bracket that could be raised or lowered for maintenance purposes. Currently, it was positioned at exactly the same level as the fluorescent light fixtures, creating a direct line of sight between the flickering bulbs and the sensitive cameras. His mind raced as he considered the implications. If the fluorescent lights were causing interference, it would explain why the machine's performance seemed inconsistent. The interference might not be constant. It could vary based on the age of the bulbs, the electrical load in the building, or even small vibrations that affected the fixtures. This would create the unpredictable behavior that had baffled the engineering team. But there was more to consider. David remembered that the machine's most catastrophic failure had occurred on Thursday afternoon during the DataCorp demonstration. That was unusual because the worst problems typically happened during evening or night shifts. However, Thursday had been cloudy and rainy, forcing the day crew to rely more heavily on artificial lighting than usual. The fluorescent lights had been running at full intensity during what should have been a natural light period. David began walking around the machine, examining it from every angle. He noticed that the optical sensors weren't just reading package labels. They were also making quality control decisions, identifying damaged items, checking for proper sealing, and verifying weight distributions. If these sensors were receiving corrupted visual information due to light interference, they could easily mistake good packages for bad ones or vice versa. The behavioral reversal that had occurred on Thursday suddenly made sense. If the interference was severe enough, it could cause the machine's decision-making algorithm to interpret visual data backwards. Items that appeared normal to the sensors might register as defective, while actually damaged items might seem acceptable, due to distorted optical input. David felt a surge of excitement mixed with uncertainty. His theory seemed logical, but he was just a janitor with a high school education. Was it possible that he had identified a problem that had escaped the attention of engineers with advanced degrees and years of specialized training? He thought about the countless hours the engineering team had spent analyzing software code, recalibrating sensors, and testing mechanical components. They had focused on the machine itself, looking for problems within its programming and hardware. But they might never have considered environmental factors like lighting interference, because that fell outside their area of expertise. David decided to test his theory, at least in a preliminary way. He found the light switches for the factory floor and turned off the overhead fluorescent fixtures directly above the sorting machine. The area became dimmer, illuminated only by lights positioned farther away and the emergency lighting system that provided basic safety illumination. Without the direct overhead fluorescent lighting, the environment around the optical sensors changed dramatically. The constant high-frequency flicker was eliminated, replaced by the steady glow of distant fixtures and LED emergency lights. If David's theory was correct, this change should improve the machine's performance significantly. Of course, he couldn't test the sorting machine himself. He didn't have access to the control systems. And even if he did, he wouldn't know how to operate such complex equipment safely. But he could document his observations and prepare to present his theory to someone who could authorize a proper test. David spent the next hour examining every aspect of the lighting setup around the sorting machine. He noted the exact positions of the fluorescent fixtures, the age and condition of the bulbs, and the mounting hardware that held everything in place. He used his phone to take pictures, creating a visual record of the spatial relationships between the lights and the optical sensors. As he worked, David's confidence in his theory grew stronger. Everything seemed to fit together like pieces of a puzzle. The timing of the failures, the inconsistent behavior, the dramatic reversal during the demonstration, all of it could be explained by fluorescent light interference affecting the machine's ability to see clearly. But David also felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. If he was right, he held the key to saving TechFlow Industries and the jobs of 400 people. If he was wrong, he would be wasting precious time when the company needed real solutions. Either way, he couldn't keep this information to himself. The stakes were too high for him to worry about overstepping boundaries or appearing presumptuous. David finished his cleaning duties quickly, his mind focused entirely on how to present his findings. He needed to approach someone with authority, someone who could authorize tests and implement changes if his theory proved correct. The obvious choice was Rebecca Martinez, the CEO, but the idea of approaching her directly felt intimidating. As he prepared to leave the factory floor, David took one last look at the sorting machine in its darkened environment. Without the overhead fluorescent lights, it seemed more peaceful somehow, like a sleeping giant that might finally rest easily. The optical sensors sat in shadow, no longer bombarded by the invisible flicker that might have been driving them to malfunction. David knew that tomorrow would bring either vindication or embarrassment. He would either be remembered as the janitor who saved the company, or as the well-meaning employee who wasted everyone's time with an amateur theory. But he also knew that he couldn't live with himself if he stayed silent and watched TechFlow collapse when he might have had the solution all along. Walking toward the exit, David felt a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet determination. He had spent 3 years observing this company from the sidelines, learning its rhythms and understanding its challenges. Now, for the first time, he had something valuable to contribute beyond just keeping the building clean. The next 24 hours would determine whether a janitor's observations could succeed where engineering expertise had failed. David went home knowing that he was about to take the biggest risk of his career, but also knowing that some risks are worth taking when the stakes involve not just his own future, but the livelihoods of hundreds of people who had become his extended family. The building fell quiet behind him, but inside the darkened factory, the sorting machine waited in its improved environment, ready to reveal whether David's theory would prove to be the breakthrough everyone desperately needed. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching David's nervous mood as he sat in his small apartment, staring at his phone. He had barely slept, his mind racing through different scenarios of how this day might unfold. The photos of the sorting machine and lighting fixtures glowed on his phone screen, evidence of what could either be the most important discovery of his life or an embarrassing mistake that would cost him his job. David had never approached a Yao CEO before. He had never questioned the judgment of engineers or suggested that he might know something they didn't. The very idea felt presumptuous and terrifying, but every time he considered staying silent, he thought about Rebecca Martinez sitting alone in that conference room Thursday night, carrying the weight of 400 jobs on her shoulders. At 10:30, David made a decision that would change everything. He put on his cleanest clothes, grabbed his phone with the photos, and drove to TechFlow Industries. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few cars belonging to the emergency weekend crew that was working around the clock to find solutions. The security guard at the front desk, Robert Chen, had known David for 3 years. They often chatted briefly when David arrived for his evening shifts, talking about sports, weather, or their families. But Robert looked surprised to see David on a Saturday morning, dressed in street clothes instead of his work uniform. "Hey, David. What brings you in today? Don't tell me they called you for overtime," Robert said with a friendly smile that quickly faded when he saw the serious expression on David's face. "I need to speak with Ms. Martinez," David said, his voice steadier than he felt. "It's about the sorting machine problem." Robert's eyebrows rose in surprise. "The CEO? David, she's been in meetings all morning with the engineering team and some consultants they flew in from California. This isn't really a good time for—" He paused, noticing something in David's expression. "Is this important?" David took a deep breath. "Robert, I think I might know what's causing the machine to malfunction. I know it sounds crazy, but I've been watching that equipment for 3 years, and I noticed something that might help." The security guard studied David's face for a long moment. Robert had been with TechFlow for 5 years and had seen plenty of well-meaning employees offer suggestions during crises. Most of the time, these ideas led nowhere. But something about David's quiet confidence was different from the usual desperate brainstorming. "All right," Robert said finally. "Let me call up to the executive floor and see if someone can spare a few minutes. But David, you know they're under incredible pressure right now. If this doesn't pan out—" "I understand," David replied. "But if I'm right, it could save the company." Robert made the call, speaking in low tones to someone upstairs. After a brief conversation, he hung up and looked at David with surprise. "Ms. Martinez wants to see you. She'll be down in 5 minutes. She said any ideas are welcome at this point, no matter where they come from." David sat in the lobby, trying to organize his thoughts while his heart pounded with nervous energy. Through the glass walls, he could see the factory floor where the sorting machine sat idle, its problems having brought one of the region's most successful companies to the brink of collapse. In a few minutes, he would either help solve a $100 million crisis or make a fool of himself in front of the CEO. Rebecca Martinez appeared in the lobby looking exhausted but alert. Her usual polished appearance showed signs of the stress she had been under: wrinkled clothes, tired eyes, and the pale complexion of someone who had spent too many hours under fluorescent lights without enough sleep or proper meals. "David, right?" she said, extending her hand with a weary smile. "Robert tells me you have an idea about our sorting system. I have to admit, I'm willing to listen to anyone at this point. Our consultants have been here all morning, and they're as baffled as our own engineers." David stood up, his mouth suddenly dry. "Yes, ma'am. I know this might sound strange coming from me, but I think the problem might be with the lighting." Martinez's expression shifted from polite attention to genuine interest. "Lighting? Can you explain what you mean?" David pulled out his phone and showed her the photos he had taken. The optical sensors on the sorting machine are positioned directly under the overhead fluorescent lights. These lights flicker at a frequency that humans can't see, but electronic sensors can detect. I think the flickering might be interfering with the machine's ability to read packages correctly. Martinez studied the photos, her expression growing more focused with each image. You're suggesting that fluorescent light interference is causing our optical sensors to malfunction? Yes, ma'am. It would explain why the problems seem worse during evening and night shifts when the fluorescent lights are running at full power. And Thursday, when the machine failed during the demonstration, was cloudy and rainy. The day crew would have needed more artificial lighting than usual. Martinez was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. David, this is actually a very sophisticated observation. Have you discussed this with anyone else? No, ma'am. I only figured it out last night while I was cleaning around the machine. I know I'm not an engineer, but I've been watching that equipment for 3 years, and something about the timing of the failures didn't seem random. Martinez made a quick decision. Come with me. I want Dr. Williams and her team to hear this immediately. They took the elevator to the second floor, where the engineering department had been transformed into a crisis command center. Whiteboards, covered with calculations and diagrams, lined the walls. Computer screens displayed endless streams of diagnostic data. The 3 consultants from California sat at a conference table with Dr. Williams and her senior engineers, all looking like they had been wrestling with an unsolvable puzzle for hours. Martinez walked into the room with David behind her, immediately capturing everyone's attention. I want everyone to listen to David's theory about our optical sensor problems. David, please explain what you told me downstairs. David felt every eye in the room focus on him. These were some of the smartest people in the industry, engineers, with advanced degrees and years of specialized experience. He was a high school graduate who cleaned their offices, but he forced himself to speak clearly and confidently. I think the fluorescent lights above the sorting machine are causing interference with the optical sensors, he began, showing his phone photos on one of the large monitors. The lights flicker at a frequency that could disrupt the sensors' ability to read packages accurately. During day shifts, natural light reduces the need for fluorescent lighting, so the interference is minimal. But during evening and night shifts, or on cloudy days like Thursday, the full-power fluorescent lighting creates enough interference to cause sorting errors. The room fell silent as the engineers studied David's photos and absorbed his explanation. Dr. Williams moved to the monitor, examining the spatial relationship between the lights and sensors that David had documented. The positioning is almost perfectly aligned, she said slowly. How did we miss this? One of the California consultants, Dr. James Park, shook his head in amazement. We spent all morning analyzing software algorithms and hardware calibrations. We never considered environmental interference factors. Dr. Williams turned to David with respect in her voice. This is actually brilliant diagnostic thinking. The frequency interference could explain not just the rejection rate problems, but also the behavioral reversal we experienced Thursday. If the optical data is corrupted severely enough, the decision-making algorithm could interpret everything backwards. Martinez stepped forward. Can we test this theory right now? Dr. Williams nodded eagerly. Absolutely. We can run the machine, with the overhead fluorescence turned off, and compare the performance to our baseline data. If David is right, we should see immediate improvement. The entire group moved quickly to the factory floor, their excitement palpable despite the exhaustion everyone felt. David found himself at the center of the action as engineers prepared to test his theory with the same machine that had been defeating them for months. Dr. Williams initiated a standard test sequence using sample packages with known specifications. With the overhead fluorescent lights turned on, the machine performed exactly as it had been, rejecting approximately 30% of correctly labeled items while accepting some that should have been flagged as problems. Then she turned off the overhead fluorescent fixtures directly above the optical sensors, leaving the area illuminated by more distant lighting sources. The change in the machine's performance was immediate and dramatic. The rejection rate dropped to less than 2%, well within acceptable parameters. More importantly, The machine correctly identified and sorted every type of package without the behavioral inconsistencies that had plagued it for so long. The engineers stood in stunned silence as the test results appeared on their monitors. Months of complex troubleshooting, millions of dollars in consulting fees, and countless hours of frustration had been resolved by a janitor's observation about lighting interference. Dr. Park was the first to speak. This is incredible. The solution was hiding in plain sight. Martinez turned to David with an expression of amazement and gratitude. David, do you realize what you've just done? You've solved a problem that was threatening to destroy this company. David felt a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. I just noticed something that seemed odd and thought it might be worth mentioning. Worth mentioning? Dr. Williams laughed, with the kind of joy that comes after solving an impossible puzzle. David, you've just saved TechFlow Industries. This fix will take less than a day to implement permanently, and it will cost practically nothing compared to what we've been spending on failed solutions. As the implications sank in, the mood in the factory shifted from crisis to celebration. Engineers began calling their colleagues to share the breakthrough news. Martinez immediately contacted the board of directors to explain that the sorting system crisis had been resolved. The consultants started calculating how quickly the fix could be implemented across all of TechFlow's installations. But for David, the most meaningful moment came when Martinez pulled him aside for a private conversation. David, I need you to know that what you've done today goes far beyond solving a technical problem. You've saved 400 jobs, including your own. You've preserved something that took years to build. And you've reminded all of us that the best solutions sometimes come from the most unexpected places. David looked around the factory floor where he had worked quietly for 3 years, watching and learning without anyone realizing he was paying attention. Now that same floor buzzed with activity as engineers implemented the simple lighting modifications that would transform TechFlow's troubled machine into the reliable system it was designed to be. The janitor who had been invisible for so long had just become the most important person in the building. And Monday morning, when Rebecca Martinez announced the breakthrough to the entire company, David's life would change in ways he never could have imagined. Monday morning at TechFlow Industries felt different from the moment employees began arriving. Word had already started spreading through unofficial channels over the weekend. The sorting machine crisis had been solved, not by expensive consultants or complex engineering solutions, but by David Johnson, the evening janitor who had worked quietly in their building for 3 years. Rebecca Martinez had spent Sunday planning something unprecedented in corporate history. She understood that David's contribution went far beyond solving a technical problem. He had demonstrated the kind of observational intelligence and problem-solving courage that companies spend millions trying to cultivate in their workforce. More importantly, he had reminded everyone that valuable insights can come from anywhere, regardless of job title or educational credentials. At 9 o'clock sharp, Martinez sent a company-wide email requesting all employees to gather in the main auditorium for an important announcement. The message was brief but carried an undertone of excitement that had been missing from company communications for months. Employees filed into the auditorium with curiosity and cautious optimism, hoping for good news but unsure what to expect. David arrived early, still wearing his work clothes and feeling completely out of place among the sea of business attire. Martinez had asked him to attend the meeting, but she hadn't explained why. He found a seat in the back, trying to remain as invisible as he had always been, unaware that his days of invisibility were about to end forever. When Martinez took the stage, the auditorium fell silent. Her usual confident demeanor had returned, replacing the exhausted stress that had marked her appearance all week. She began with the news everyone was hoping to hear. "I'm here to announce that our sorting system crisis has been completely resolved," she said, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium. "As of this morning, all our machines are operating at optimal performance levels. The Data Corp contract is back on track, and we've received confirmation that our existing clients will be maintaining their relationships with us." The auditorium erupted in relieved applause and cheers. Months of anxiety about job security and company survival lifted from hundreds of shoulders simultaneously. But Martinez raised her hand for silence, indicating that she had more to say. However, the most important part of this story isn't that we solved the problem, she continued. It's how we solved it, and who solved it. The breakthrough came from someone who has been part of our TechFlow family for 3 years. Someone who has been observing our operations with careful attention, while the rest of us were too busy to notice what was right in front of us. Martinez gestured toward the back of the auditorium. David Johnson, would you please come up here? David felt his heart stop. 400 pairs of eyes turned to look at him as conversations buzzed throughout the auditorium. He had expected to listen to the announcement and then return to his regular duties, not to become the center of attention in front of the entire company. Slowly, David made his way to the front of the auditorium, his legs feeling unsteady with each step. The applause grew louder as employees realized that their colleague in maintenance attire was somehow connected to the breakthrough that had saved their jobs. When David reached the stage, Martinez placed a hand on his shoulder and addressed the audience with genuine warmth and respect. David noticed something that our engineers, consultants, and I had all missed. While we were focused on complex technical solutions, he observed that fluorescent light interference was disrupting our optical sensors. His insight led to a simple fix that eliminated months of problems in a matter of hours. The applause became thunderous as the full implications sank in. The janitor they passed in the hallways every day had solved the crisis that had threatened to destroy their company. David stood on stage feeling overwhelmed by the attention and recognition, but also deeply moved by the genuine appreciation he saw on his colleagues' faces. Martinez continued, her voice growing more passionate as she spoke. David's contribution reminds us of something crucial about innovation and problem-solving. The best solutions don't always come from the people with the fanciest degrees or the highest positions in the organizational chart. Sometimes they come from careful observation, logical thinking, and the courage to speak up when you notice something important. She turned to face David directly. Which is why I'm announcing several changes, effective immediately. First, David will be receiving a recognition bonus of $500,000, representing the value of his contribution to saving this company. The auditorium fell silent as employees processed the magnitude of this announcement. $500,000 was more than most of them earned in several years. For David, who had been supporting his family on a janitor's salary, it represented life-changing financial security. But Martinez wasn't finished. Second, I'm offering David a position as Director of Quality Assurance and Process Improvement, with a starting salary of $120,000 annually. This role will include full engineering training, technical education, support, and the responsibility for helping us identify and solve operational challenges across all our facilities. David felt the world spinning around him. In the span of a weekend, he had gone from being an invisible janitor to becoming a highly paid executive. The promotion represented not just financial advancement, but recognition of his analytical abilities and problem-solving skills. Finally, Martinez said, addressing the entire audience, I'm establishing the David Johnson Innovation Program. This initiative will encourage input and observations from every employee, regardless of position or department. We're going to create formal channels for sharing ideas, reporting observations, and contributing to our continuous improvement efforts. David has shown us that valuable insights exist throughout our organization. We just need to be better at listening for them. The standing ovation that followed was unlike anything TechFlow had ever experienced. Employees cheered not just for David's recognition, but for the validation that their own observations and ideas might be valued and heard. The program represented a fundamental shift in how the company would approach innovation and problem-solving. When the applause finally subsided, Martinez handed David the microphone, inviting him to address his colleagues. David had never spoken to such a large group before, but he found his voice as he looked out at the faces of people who had become his extended family. 3 years ago, when I started working here, I never imagined I would be standing on this stage, he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. But I've learned that this company succeeds because everyone here cares about doing good work, even when nobody's watching. I just happened to notice something while I was doing my job. The same way any of you might notice something while doing yours. David paused, looking around the auditorium at engineers, accountants, sales representatives, and maintenance workers. Ms. Martinez is right that good ideas can come from anywhere, but they only matter if we have the courage to share them and if we work for people who are willing to listen. I'm grateful to be part of a company that values observation and curiosity, no matter where it comes from. The response was immediate and heartfelt. David's humble words resonated with employees who had often felt that their insights were overlooked or undervalued. His success had opened a door for everyone to feel more empowered to contribute beyond their basic job descriptions. After the industrial assembly, David found himself surrounded by colleagues who wanted to congratulate him and express their amazement at his breakthrough. Engineers who had worked on the sorting system for months thanked him for solving a puzzle that had consumed their professional lives. Customer service representatives appreciated knowing that they wouldn't have to handle angry client calls about shipping errors anymore. Dr. Williams approached David with particular gratitude. "I've been working on this problem for 18 months, she said. "The solution you found is so elegant and simple that I feel embarrassed we missed it. But I'm also inspired by your example. You've reminded me that good engineering isn't just about technical knowledge. It's about careful observation and logical thinking." The transformation extended beyond personal recognition. Within days, the David Johnson Innovation Program began receiving dozens of suggestions from employees across all departments. Maintenance workers reported equipment inefficiencies they had observed. Administrative assistants suggested process improvements for paperwork handling. Sales representatives shared insights about customer needs that weren't being addressed. Many of these suggestions led to meaningful improvements in productivity, cost savings, and customer satisfaction. The program created a culture where everyone felt empowered to contribute ideas, transforming TechFlow from a traditional hierarchical organization into a collaborative environment that valued intelligence and insight, regardless of its source. David's personal life changed dramatically as well. The bonus money allowed him to pay off his family's debts, help his children with college expenses, and purchase a home in a better neighborhood. But perhaps more importantly, his new position gave him a sense of professional purpose and intellectual challenge that he had never experienced before. His brother Tony, the electrician who had unknowingly provided the crucial information about fluorescent light interference, became a local celebrity himself when the story spread through their community. The Johnson family, who had always struggled financially, suddenly found themselves in a position of stability and respect that seemed almost surreal. The story of David's breakthrough attracted national attention when Martinez shared it on social media and in industry publications. Business schools began using it as a case study about innovation, organizational culture, and the importance of valuing diverse perspectives. David was invited to speak at conferences about problem-solving and workplace observation, roles he never could have imagined for himself. But despite all the recognition and life changes, David remained grounded in the values that had led to his breakthrough in the first place. He continued to approach problems with careful observation, logical thinking, and humble curiosity. In his new role, he implemented systems that encouraged the same qualities in others, ensuring that TechFlow would continue to benefit from insights that might otherwise go unnoticed. 6 months after his promotion, David stood in the same factory where he had made his crucial observation, now overseeing quality assurance operations across multiple facilities. The sorting machine hummed smoothly in the background, its optical sensors positioned safely away from fluorescent light interference, processing packages with the reliability and accuracy that had made TechFlow an industry leader. The building, that had once threatened to close due to equipment failures, now operated more efficiently than ever before. Hundreds of employees went to work each day knowing that their observations mattered, their ideas would be heard, and their contributions could make a real difference in the company's success. David's story had become more than just a tale of individual recognition. It had become a testament to the power of paying attention, speaking up when something doesn't seem right, and creating environments where everyone's intelligence is valued and utilized. The janitor who had been invisible for 3 years had not only saved a company, he had transformed it into a place where no good idea would ever go unnoticed again.